So the title of the webinar today is Connected and Autonomous Vehicles Are Coming. Is your ITS team prepared? My name is Jonathan Darden. I'm with IBI Group based in Calgary, Alberta, and also co-chair of the ITS Canada ATMS Technical Committee. This webinar session has been organized by the ITS Canada ATIS, ATMS, and CVAV technical committees. For more information on ITS Canada technical committees, please visit the ITS Canada website at www.itscanada.ca. On the website, you'll find more information on each technical committee and the contact details for each committee co-chair. Also, if you're not currently an ITS Canada member, member benefits and information related to ongoing initiatives can be found by accessing the website as well. The original intent for this webinar was to arrange a follow-up session to the Privacy Impact Assessment panel discussion that was held during the ITS Canada annual conference in Calgary in May of 2016. In discussion with the ATIS and CVAV technical committees, it was determined that a joint webinar session should be arranged, as there are many common topics being considered for future sessions. As everybody knows, CVAV is a very hot topic and very much overarches many sub-disciplines within ITS. It was decided that this webinar will focus on the themes of policy, privacy, and technology considerations. It's likely possible to arrange a week-long webinar on each of the three themes, but fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we only have an hour scheduled for this session. Today we were fortunate to be joined by three panel members. Our first panel member is Barrie Kirk, Executive Director of the Canadian Automated Vehicle Centre of Excellence, CAVCOE. Also nationally recognized lawyer and privacy advocate Philippa Lawson, and Dr. Tony Koo, Assistant Professor, Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Centre for Smart Transportation, University of Alberta. So the format for the webinar session today, just moving forward here, each panel member will provide a brief presentation followed by a few questions that have been prepared by the ITS Canada technical committees. We will then open the floor for webinar attendees to ask questions. The goal of the webinar session is to be interactive, so please submit questions using the webinar chat window. So you should see on your webinar control panel there is a tab for chat. So just feel free to submit questions at any point in time. If you'd like your question directed to a specific panel member, please identify that in your question as well. And again, please feel free to submit questions at any point so that you do not forget. So our first panel member will be providing a brief presentation on policy considerations in CVAV, and that's Barrie Kirk. As mentioned, Barrie is the Executive Director of the Canadian Automated Vehicle Centre of Excellence, CAVCOE. He's worked in technology industries in Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom, including senior management positions in Ottawa area companies. He's a well-known consultant, speaker, and broadcaster on automated vehicles. His other roles include the membership as part of the Board of Directors for Unmanned Systems Canada, the Automotive Advisory Board of Centennial College. Barrie received a BSc Honours in Electrical Engineering from Coventry University in the United Kingdom and is a professional engineer. Thank you for taking the time to join us today, Barrie. Can you please provide the webinar attendees a bit more information on your background, area of expertise, and a few key messages that you'd like to share related to CVAV and policy?
Certainly, Jonathan, and thank you for the introduction, and good morning to everybody. Yes, CAVCOE, the full name is a mouthful, so we say CAVCOE. We have, over the last few years, established a range of partnerships with organizations in other countries, particularly the US, France, and Australia. It's a recognition of the fact that the whole AV and CV industry is obviously global, and there's a lot of things happening around the world that we need to stay connected to. Jonathan, next slide, please. Within CAVCOE, we do a number of different things. First of all, we do consulting work both for governments and for the private sector. And interestingly, last year, 2016, most of our consulting work was from overseas clients. I do a lot of public speaking, a lot of media work, and you can see on that slide there, AV Update. It's a free monthly newsletter, and so this is not a commercial, it's free. If you want to stay up to speed with what's happening in the AV space, feel free to go to our website, CAVCOE.com, and sign up for it. Next slide, Jonathan, please. These are my key messages. First of all, when I look at the world, and especially I look at the G7 countries, the sad news is that Canada is dead last in its preparations for autonomous vehicles. And that's hurting us both in terms of the industry, opportunities, economic development, and also in terms of the regulatory side, which is linked. Within Canada, and certainly within governments in Canada, Ontario is leading the way. Compared to the other jurisdictions, it's the only jurisdiction in Canada where, for example, you can do testing of AVs at the moment. But it's important to recognize the important work being done by universities and industry. Certainly in my part of the world here in Ottawa, one of the real cheerleaders for AVs and CVs is BlackBerry QNX. And there's a lot of good work being done by universities such as Waterloo, and Tony will be talking about the University of Alberta. I often compare what we are doing in Canada with other countries, and especially the UK. And as I mentioned in the first bullet there, we come up short. There's a lot of things that are happening in the UK that we should be doing here. And in terms of policy, for example, the regulatory framework and the economic and business development framework are linked. And the UK has recognized this. In the UK, they have taken the policy unit out of their equivalent of Transport Canada and taken the policy unit out of their equivalent of the Innovation, Science and Economic Development and formed a joint policy unit called CCAV, Center for Communicating and Autonomous Vehicles. And that ensures that the regulatory framework and innovation frameworks are in sync. These are two sides of the same coin. If we have too rigid, too restrictive a regulatory framework, then that hurts innovation, it hurts the economic development. Because, for example, there's many different examples I could give. One of them is this. In the UK, you can test any AV on any public roads anywhere in the country without a permit. Here, as most of you know, you need a permit to test in Ontario, and you cannot test an AV anywhere else in the country. Other examples, there's far more government funding in the UK than here. The government in the UK is a real cheerleader for this space. They want the UK to be a leader in the world in development and testing of AVs. And I would love to see the Prime Minister and Minister Garneau do a lot more cheerleading for this space. And a lot of other details I could give, but that gives you a quick overview. I do applaud what Tony and the other people at the universities and the industry people are doing, but we need support from the federal government, equivalent to what support is being provided by other governments to their industry and their universities. And with that, Jonathan, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Barry. Very interesting information that you've provided to the group. Just following up on the first point on the slide here, stating that Canada is dead last in the G7 in preparing for AV. Do you feel that we have any unique challenges in Canada that are unique to Canada that could be behind that?
I think two things come to mind. Well, three things. One is, we do tend to be, unfortunately, a bit conservative, and that does hurt us, and it's unfortunate, it's a fact. Second, because of the proximity to the US, Transport Canada is obviously very aware of the need to synchronize our policy with the US, and so we tend to be a bit of a follower. And that's unfortunate, but in some ways I do understand that, but there's a lot of innovation that could be done, without necessarily following on with the UK, with the US. Let me stop there.
Right. Thanks, Barrie. I'm sure we'll dig more into the topic of policy during the webinar attendee Q&A. Just one last quick question for you before we move on. From your perspective, what is the most important initiative or policy decision that the government of Canada should be focusing on to move CVAV forward?
The biggest policy decision is to take an all-of-government perspective, a government-wide perspective. This is not just transportation, it's not just economic development. Virtually every federal department will be impacted by AVs and CVs, health, policing, terrorism, and many other areas. So they need to take a government-wide perspective. The UK Transportation Committee in the House of Commons has recommended formally that the UK appoint a minister for driverless vehicles. The City of Toronto has in fact got a city-wide committee which includes not only transportation and transit, but revenue and policy and zoning and many other areas, policing, emergency response, and they in fact have created that up about a year ago. It would be wonderful if the federal government would do the same thing and create a framework for a federal government-wide management of this file.
Yes, thank you, Barrie. And we're receiving quite a lot of questions through the chat dialogue based on the input that you have been providing. So I'm sure we'll circle back with quite a few questions near the end of the session. So moving on, our second panel member, let's move forward here, is Philippa Lawson. Pippa is a lawyer and nationally recognized privacy advocate. She practiced telecommunications, privacy and consumer protection law with the Public Interest Advocacy Centre for 12 years before starting up the Canadian Internet Policy and Public Interest Clinic, CIPPIC, a technology law clinic based at the University of Ottawa, Faculty of Law. Pippa was involved in the development of Canada's private sector data protection legislation, is responsible for several groundbreaking complaints under that legislation, and has researched and written numerous studies and submissions on the efficacy of private sector privacy law in Canada. She is the lead researcher and author of an in-depth report on the privacy implications of connected cars, published by the British Columbia Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. Thank you for joining us today, Pippa. Can you please provide the webinar attendees a bit more information on your background, area of expertise, and considerations related to CVAV and privacy? Please let me know when you'd like me to advance the slides on your behalf.
Sure, thanks, Jonathan. So you've given a good introduction. I've been working in the area of privacy for about 25 years as a lawyer and privacy advocate with a focus on the impact of new technologies in this area. The report that you're referring to, and perhaps you could move to that slide so people can see it, it's available online. That was funded by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, and the research was done over the course of a year spanning 2014-15. So a little bit dated, but I think it's still all pretty good information. So moving on then to the next slide, I'm just going to start by talking briefly about the data that we're talking about. So connected car systems, and the study focused on private sector connected car systems. So we found that there are many different types of information collected by these systems, or potentially. So the customer identification and account data, initially from the customer, telematics systems gathering the data about the vehicle operations, driver behavior, location. Now we're getting biometric and personal health data through wearables wearables and in-vehicle sensors and cameras. Then you've got all the information gathered through the infotainment systems, which can include personal contacts and calendars, highly sensitive data. And then next slide, please. And then when you look at the public sector ITS, of course, we're talking about now all kinds of additional data being collected from outside the vehicle and being broadcast by each vehicle. So you can move on to the next one, Jonathan. So this is just a visual of so who wants access, who gets access to this data, and who wants access. So there are many different entities that are interested in this data. And each has its own interest, and we know there is a huge pressure now to monetize customer data in pretty much every different industry. And there are no technological limits on the gathering, sharing, or using of this data. The limits really are just voluntary or legal. But there are many privacy risks arising from the collection of this range of data about individuals. And they range from just the risk of security breaches when you have a database of this kind of information, malicious or unintended. You can have single sort of egregious acts like stalkers, snoopers, identity thieves, whatever. You also have sort of third-party uses that once you used to exist before, available to agencies, insurance, debt collectors, whatever, actually legally they have access to information they wouldn't otherwise have had before. You have all the unexpected and undesired secondary uses of information that may be, notionally authorized by the fine print of, 20-page contracts that no one ever reads, terms of service. So all of this lead to significant privacy risks. There are risks of the accumulation of this data over time, as well as the aggregation of data from many different sources, from the vehicles themselves, and then connecting that with other data available from other sources. So when all of that kind of data is consolidated, it can paint a very detailed picture about the private life of an individual. And this is, a lot of people would have ethical and moral concerns about this, but there are also, and you can move on to the next slide, legal standards in Canada. So we actually have private sector as well as public sector laws. This slide just shows the fundamental components of our private sector law, which apply to automobile manufacturers, connected car systems providers, all these private entities. So there are a number of requirements under the law here. Key ones are you can't collect, use, retain, or disclose personal data about individuals. And personal data is like any information that can be linked to an identifiable individual without that person's knowledge or consent, other than in very limited circumstances. So, and there are lots of other specific requirements which I won't go through, but one of the things that we did in the study was we looked at the terms of service for connected car services in early 2015, and we found that they violated, across the board pretty much, violated pretty much every one of these requirements under law. So next slide, please. So we recommend, at the end of the study, we did make recommendations, first to industry and second to government. So for industry, where you can see the recommendations here, include privacy experts at the beginning when you're starting to design the systems. Adopt what are known as privacy by design principles, which I'm listing there. In particular, don't collect more information than necessary. It just exposes you to more risk. Make privacy the default in the systems that you're designing. And develop industry standards. And the final slide here, and for government, is suggesting that government also include privacy experts in the development of ITS and also follow privacy by design principles. So, and then there's a final slide there which just gives the link to the report, which is available for download online. Thanks.
Thanks, Pippa. Just a few quick follow-up questions for you. In the publication, The Connected Car, Who's in the Driver's Seat, the importance of reviewing privacy considerations when combining new and existing data sources was highlighted. Also, you have a point in your presentation regarding function creep and the importance of involving privacy experts in the deployment of ATIS. Can you provide more information or recommendations on this process? How and when should transportation agencies engage privacy experts?
So as I said, right at the beginning, it's always more costly and difficult to, retrofit, to go back and redesign something that wasn't designed properly in the first place. We have legal standards out there. So one of our recommendations is that, and I understand there's going to be a project funded by the Privacy Commission of Canada on this year, is to take the very broad legal standards that exist right now and that speak to all sectors and translate them into automobile industry, connected car, language, and so that they're more clear and understandable by the industry. And then when designing, so right at the beginning, when manufacturers are ordering up products or whatever, make sure that whoever is designing the product is designing them with privacy in mind. And there are these well-established principles now called privacy by design, developed initially by the Anne CAVCOE, the Ontario Privacy Commissioner many years ago, who's still working in this field, and adopted internationally. So it's right at the beginning, both ITS public sector or private sector.
Thank you. That's very interesting, the concept of privacy by design, and that leads into the next question that we have for you. And I think when a lot of agencies think about CVAV, they think about the type of data that potentially would be available and how it could be complementary or augment traditional data sources. And there seems to be a lot of confusion around the data that would actually be available from CVAV systems. And a large reason for that is the privacy implications, and there definitely appears to be a disconnect. So the privacy by design concept is really interesting. So moving forward, how do you feel transportation agencies can develop a better understanding of how privacy will help shape the type and granularity of data that will actually be available?
Well, I think it's simple. I think it's just including privacy experts in the policy forums and groups that Barrie's talking about, that saying we need to have joint working groups and forums, and making sure that you've got folks who understand privacy there. I think that's a simple thing. Get the right brains in the room.
Right, thank you. We have lots of follow-up questions flowing through the chat window here, and I'm sure we'll circle back on that topic very shortly. Moving on, our next presenter, and I have to apologize, Tony, the title that was used for your original introduction is a bit outdated, but Tony too is the Director for Smart Transportation at the University of Alberta, and he's also the Managing Director for the Canadian Active Aurora Network. Since joining the University of Alberta in 2009, Tony was also responsible for founding the Intelligent Transportation System Research Lab. Tony is leading the Active Aurora Testbed Network that provides a platform for investigating and implementing innovative connected vehicle technologies. Thank you for taking the time to join us today, Tony. At this point, I'd like to ask you to provide additional information on your background, a few key messages related to technology and CVAV, and the Active Aurora Testbed for the webinar attendees.
Thank you, Jason. And here I'm very happy and then to share some update about the connected vehicle technology and also Active Aurora Testbed. And first, then the kind of technology is pretty new and also pretty comprehensive. So we are lucky, and then we work with different partners and for different government agencies, Transport Canada, Transportation, City of Edmonton, City of Sandalwood, and for connected vehicle related research. And also we partner with several key industry partners, TELUS, Centec, IBI, and ATIS for this kind of research. And 2 universities involved, and University of Alberta and UBC, and for kind of vehicle research. Next, please. For kind of vehicle, and then so for this slide, it show what kind of key technology for kind of vehicle. So here I want to mention what's the new devices and in kind of vehicle they can domain. And one is about OBE, onboard equipment. So onboard equipment will play the role more like a central calculation or computation kind of device in the vehicle. And also it will receive the data from different data sources, and for example, like a GPS, like a smartphone, or some sensor in the car, or in the future and tie with the CAN bus. And another major device is roadside equipment. And the roadside equipment can talk with a signal controller, and can talk with some existing and installed devices and system on roadside. So that's what OB and RC, the 2 major devices, and brought to connected vehicle. And here I want to say the onboard equipment, roadside equipment, now this is just for test and demo or proof of concept purpose. So in the future, and roadside equipment, for example, can be part of like a signal controller, can be part of like a video camera, or can be part of our lighting system. So that was the function. In the future, the roadside equipment function will be more and more comprehensive, or totally different from what we see today. For onboard equipment, that depends on in the future how the regulation and policy, and then will be announced from the government. So, for example, in the future, and if like in US and if the US DOT they make the regulation for kind of vehicle, so that will be and similar to our seat belt. So onboard equipment will be part of our feature vehicle. So that's the left side. The right side just show what kind of application, generated from kind of vehicle technology. So first, as the 2 presenters and presented before, I think definitely and the kind of vehicle will generate a lot of new data sources. For example, more detailed vehicle trajectory, and also more detailed communication message between vehicle and vehicle and infrastructure, and also vehicle to infrastructure. So for example, the vehicle can carry message and from the infrastructure and then bring to legacy infrastructure. So it will generate different, because this is kind of ad hoc network, it will generate totally different, very comprehensive, this kind of message dissemination and the environment. Next slide, please. For actual rollout, then we finished phase 1 already, and in the past 3 years. And so from this slide, and you can see what kind of devices we have deployed in active rollout. And for phase 1, we finished installing 30 roadside equipment along 3 corridors and 1 intersection. And we have 14 roadside equipment on arterial. So we'll be connected with the controller. So we generate the closed loop. We can send a message to the controller, but at the same time receive a message from controller as well. So for active rollout phase 2, so now is on the planning stage. And here first we have to do the coverage expansion. So that means we will cover more roads, more arterial roads, and more freeway roads. And also we put the UOV South Campus as part of the phase 2. And we will put LTV cellular communication and compare with the DSRC. And also we will put the DGPS at the LiDAR, this kind of testing environment in the campus control environment. And because of the cooperation with the City of Edmonton and the City of Calgary, and we will put connected automated vehicle together for South Campus test. So from the right figure, you can see the orange curve and just show the connected vehicle test track, and we planned. So we will start do some like construction work and this summer. And the blue one shows automated shuttle and the test route. And we got very strong support from provincial government, and in terms of legislation, in terms of legal side. So we will add additional gateway and then create a closed environment automated test route. And yeah, this is my major information. And then maybe later on we can have the Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks, Tony. It's evident that the active Aurora testbed and associated partners have invested significantly into the infrastructure that's currently in place for the testbed, which is great. For cities and municipalities that are interested in deploying their own CV technology, what do you feel would be the minimum base technology requirements to get started?
Yeah, I think the first very important is engineers or like a director and who is in charge of like traffic management center or like a transit center, and then they need to understand the kind of vehicle technology is not eliminate all the existing devices. This is more like is on top of the existing ATIS system investment, we will add more stuff. So here, as I mentioned, the onboard equipment, the roadside equipment, that will be the key devices at the current stage. But definitely, once we build this kind of infrastructure, it will create a very open, integrated, data-driven this kind of environment. And we have more and more applications that can be on top of that. And we can put fire and ambulance and police and transit, different fleet-related applications, and on top of this integrated system. Hello?
Hi, Tony. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, good. Sorry about that. I was just saying, it feels now that it's very common for there to be an announcement every few months associated with a new pilot project related to CVAV, a new test bed or initiative. In your opinion, what are some unique opportunities from a Canadian perspective to contribute to further refining and evolving CVAV technology?
I think I have two key messages for this. And one is because previously, like Barrie mentioned, sometimes we claim and then Canada is a bit conservative, but I think also sometimes it's good because we have a very close cooperation relationship with like Oshito or Michigan DOT, Michigan's initiative in CVAV, California initiative in CVAV, and we benefited a lot from their existing investment. So that's why, and then for Canadian contents, for example, like cold weather, and like our unique, like for example, in Alberta, in Edmonton, we have very special like work zone and winter zone, work season and winter season. So how we can customize this kind of specific needs and for Canadian content, I think that will be the first like key component. For example, in the minus 30 degrees, and we test the device, and then we have a lot of detailed data for that. So that will be a very good evidence to show and how and to evaluate the devices and to how what they are performing in different weather conditions. And the second point, I think very exciting, and then from the days ago, and from the federal government, the smart and mentioned smart city challenge. So I think for smart city challenge, and then later on, I'm sure ATIS and CVAV will play a very important role. And even let's say we are behind a bit, but I think also maybe we are on the very good and like a shortcut track in Canada.
Thank you, Tony. That fits in really well with one of the questions that we just received. The question is related to some unique Canadian environment considerations like rural roads, limited lane markings, gravel. But from your perspective, it sounds like this is really an opportunity because it would allow Canadian test beds to develop the technology and improve the technology to address those challenges. Is that correct?
Yeah, I strongly agree that. Yep.
Yep. Thank you, Tony. So moving on, the next segment that we'd like to walk through is just the more open Q&A from the webinar attendees. So on the screen right now we have the names of the webinar attendees. So if you have a specific question that you would like directed to a specific panel member, please identify that in your question. And we'll start working through the questions that we have here. Looks like we have around 20 minutes or so, which is pretty good. So the first question that we have is for Barrie, and the question's coming from Patrick Fitzhenry from Alberta Transportation. The question is, if a federal approach is not likely to move with the appropriate speed, do you think that a focus on provincial DOTs may be a better approach?
Good question. My preference is to see both. One of the initiatives in the US by the US DOT is, quite correctly, US DOT is concerned about having a patchwork quilt of different regulations across the US. And if we have the different provincial and territorial agencies setting their own regulations, their own regulatory frameworks, we could end up with a patchwork quilt. We do need coordination between them and some body, some organization to actually conduct that that cooperation. It could be Transport Canada, and that's Plan A, but you also have these other organizations like CCMTA that could perform that coordination role. So the real objective is to have consistency across the country, and that's, I think, the most important thing.
Thanks, Barrie. Philippa, I believe you touched briefly on this with the definition of industry standards. Do you have anything to add to that question?
I would agree with Barrie, and I would say it's actually North American as well as Canada-wide, where we need the coordination and the harmonization of standards. So yeah, it's a big challenge, but it can't be ignored.
Thanks, Philippa. Next question we have is for Barrie as well. And the question is, has CAVCOE looked at the Drive Sweden model as an opportunity for Canada?
We've looked at a range of different options, and there's Drive Sweden. I'm very familiar with the Helsinki model, and there's a lot of good things happening in different parts of the world. And UK, Holland, Australia, a lot of good things happening. We can learn a lot, I think, by doing a scan of what other countries are doing and picking the best pieces from this country and that country. We can learn a lot by doing that.
Thanks, Barrie. Next question we have here is for Philippa. The question is, what are your thoughts on the required security and encryption methods proposed by FHWA for mandated V2V to promote privacy? That's a very specific question. Any thoughts on that?
Unfortunately, no, I can't speak to that specific question.
Okay, thank you.
What I would say, though, is if you're talking about security, security is, from my perspective, one aspect of privacy, but privacy involves concerns that go much broader than just security. So, and that's one of the messages I'm always giving, is that the challenges here are not just about security, cybersecurity. They're also about individual privacy and treating individual data appropriately. In particular, not gathering, right at the beginning, not gathering more than you need to in the first place, and not retaining it longer than you need to.
And Jonathan, can I just add one quick thought to Pippa's answer? I mean, I agree with her, but a few weeks ago I spoke at a cybersecurity conference here in Ottawa, and one of the takeaways I had from that is that, yes, there's a lot of bad guys out there, Russians, Chinese, and others who are doing the hacking, but the biggest weak link in the whole privacy space are individuals who don't follow best practices and let that data leak away. So I think in addition to whatever technical solutions, there's a big job needed to educate people to be a lot more, to adopt best practices in preserving their own data.
And if I could just jump in once more on that, is that it's a real risk to organizations. It's not just a question of respecting people's privacy. If you're collecting and or keeping more personal data than you need to, you're exposing yourself or your company to a risk of security breaches and the consequences of that. If you didn't have that data in the first place, you wouldn't be exposed.
All right, thanks, Philippa. Thanks, Barrie. So just building on that, somewhat of a similar topic is that the challenges related to cross-border management of data. So this question is for you, Philippa. Certain countries have limits on where personal data can be stored. What happens if you cross the border in the US and vice versa? Do you know of any framework for handling cross-country travel for connected autonomous vehicles? Basically, the question is, it's definitely going to be a challenge moving forward, and do you have any thoughts or recommendations on how that could potentially be managed?
It's a good question. Raises a few different issues. There is and has been for some time work on cross-border, trying to establish, mostly it gets at trying to establish international standards for privacy protection so that countries aren't differing too much on what they're doing. What we have right now is a situation where legally Canada has much stronger and more comprehensive legal protections for data than does the US. So when you cross, or when your data crosses the border, which it may be doing right now in my communication to you folks over this these phone lines or whatever, it's not receiving the same protection when it goes into the States. It might be getting scooped up by American authorities. And if it's stored on a server in the US, same thing. So it depends on where the data is right now, and there are significant differences in the legal protection. So do I have any suggestions? I think we just have to keep working on establishing these standards and having them put in place both at the industry level voluntarily and at the government level from a more of a regulatory perspective, and trying to get them harmonized. Across North America, if not more broadly, globally.
Thanks, Philippa. Harmonizing the standards and the approach is definitely an important consideration. It leads into another question that we have here. This is for both Barrie and Philippa, and feel free to jump in as well, Tony. The question is, there does not seem to be any consistency in the approach by the federal/provincial governments and the automobile industry. Moving forward, how do we reconcile? Maybe over to you first, Barrie.
Okay, I'm not quite sure. I hear the question there, Jonathan. I'm not quite sure the scope, because my impression is that there is coordination. The automobile sectors have their own associations that do advocate for certain things with federal and provincial governments. In general, I think there is a lot of coordination going on at the moment, so I'm not quite sure what the questioner had in mind. And there's also a lot of coordination within the industry itself. I mean, in the CV space, there's a lot of coordination. There's a new organization that was formed last year, a global organization called 5GAA, which includes major automobile companies like Daimler, Audi, Ford, includes major mobile phone companies like Nokia, Samsung, Ericsson, Huawei, and these organizations are working together to develop standards and best practices for the next generation of cell phones, 5G, and their compatibility with cars. So there's a lot of things happening in that space. But as in terms of government, I think there is advocacy. I know that, for example, late last year, the Prime Minister visited General Motors in Oshawa for a major announcement. I know that the Prime Minister also went out to BlackBerry TONX late last year as well. So there is some activity there, coordination at a senior level. So I'm not really sure the detail of what that questioner had in mind.
Well, it's good. It sounds like there's been progress being made. Feel free to jump in, Tony. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, and I think for connected vehicle and vehicle manufacturer invested a lot of money on that already, but the vehicle manufacturer only focus on the major focus on V2V. But as a government agency, I think we need to think more about, say, because we know and we heard that, and then like GM, they will release their new model and vehicle with DSRC module possibly this year. So that's why, as like infrastructure side, to support V2I, how municipality government to prepare our infrastructure can support better and for this kind of new vehicle. So I think that's a big disconnection. And especially in the US, and I attended quite a few meetings, and sometimes vehicle manufacturer just talk with vehicle manufacturer, and DOT just talk with DOT. So how we can collect the vehicle manufacturer and the infrastructure owner, municipality or provincial government, I think that's pretty important. And another point in Canada, because Canada is kind of small, and I would suggest like ATIS Canada, Tech, and IT, or like maybe Transport Canada need to play some role. We just have one like a group, rather than under different organizations have different kind of vehicle group. So basically, I think we need to have this kind of more like collaborative effort, and to really put both from the vehicle side and infrastructure side, and to promote this kind of technology.
Thank you, Tony. Pippa, did you have a comment to add?
Yeah, I'd just say from the, data protection is just one piece. It's one of the many challenges in the development of connected and automotive vehicles, obviously. But that's one where I think the government does need to play a leadership role, and I don't see it doing so yet. And that means federal government and as well, because it needs to be harmonized. So it seems that the industry is not coming up with its own specific data protection standards to guide it in the design and development of the specific services and products and systems. So I think government really needs to step up and play a leadership role by making sure that this particular aspect of the challenge is addressed now.
Thanks, Pippa. A quick follow-up question for Tony that just came in. Tony, what do you think the time frame would be for deploying V2V technology in the majority of vehicles? And at what point do you feel the benefits will be obtained, in your opinion? It's more of a question around the time.
Exactly, and then we are. Yeah, that's exactly, and we are thinking then for phase 2. So we are discussing with one major vehicle manufacturer, and once we finalize the agreement, we will release the news very soon. And then the basic idea is the vehicle manufacturers, they have this kind of vehicle already, and then but we have our infrastructure already, and then we can work closely and seamless and put the vehicle into infrastructure and how to reduce our congestion, improve safety. And that's something I think we would like to work with them together and then to address some issues. And I think if for test and pilot purpose, it can be done very, very, very early. But in terms of regulation and then for the large scale, like deployment or like how to, that will be related to regulation timeline for connected vehicle.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Another quick question for you, Tony. How has the Canadian climate adversely affected your project, so the Active Aurora testbed? And you could provide some examples of specific issues that you've had to overcome?
Yeah, for example, and then I have like 2 examples. For example, One is in Canada, we spend a lot of money for road weather information system, but we install just for fixed place. So in one of our test corridor, what we want to do is how can, based on the kind of vehicle to collect the mobility kind of data, to integrate with the static, this kind of with this kind of data to provide a better temporary coverage and spatial coverage of with data. So that's one example. The second example is, for example, weather has a huge impact to the capacity, has a huge impact to the speed pattern. So comparing summer and winter, so how we can consider this kind of weather impact into, for example, our like signal control, and how we can take some weather inputs as a input and for the signal control to reduce some like potential conflict in intersection, or how we can provide the leviathan drive speed and for the for some other and bad weather, and then to improve safety. So that's something that we are doing now.
Thank you, Tony. It's an interesting question that just came in, and I think we can address it to all three panel members, so feel free to jump in. The question is, at the current time, where are the business opportunities in CV and AV for small and medium-sized Canadian companies? Maybe we'll start with you, Barrie. Any thoughts?
I think, yeah, two thoughts. First of all, let me be realistic. We in Canada are not likely to develop and build complete AVs or CV systems anytime soon. But there's a huge AV and CV ecosystem where there's a lot of tier 1, tier 2 companies, people who make connectivity systems like BlackBerry QNX, security systems, sensors, processing, software, and all of that. So there's a huge business opportunity on the technology side. What we do have in Canada across the country is a wonderful, very vibrant technology system. And the cars of the future in the 2020s will have between 40 and 60% of the value will be technology. That's a huge opportunity. Second, getting a bit closer to Pippa's area, I was in a meeting in Washington a few weeks back, and one of the OEMs has estimated that the value of data collected by vehicles is worth 3 times the value of the vehicle itself. So there's a huge opportunity with data harvesting, big data analytics, and monetizing that, many different opportunities, and that runs smack into Pippa's concerns about privacy, a very real concern, but there is a big opportunity on the big data side.
That's very interesting. Pippa, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I see, from my perspective, I see an opportunity for a standards development organization to jump into this field right away. If the government's not acting to regulate with data protection standards, the CSA or someone can come up, work with industry to come up with workable, sensible data protection standards. And then develop CSA already has a trust mark that then connected car services and OEMs can say, look, they put that seal of approval on their systems. Our system respects your privacy. It has this seal of approval. There's an opportunity.
Yeah, very good point. Tony, do you have anything to add? The question is, where are the opportunities in CV and AV for small and medium-sized Canadian companies at the moment?
Yeah, I agree with Barrie about, for example, data analytics. I think that's a big opportunity. And because the bigger giant, like vehicle manufacturer, like IT giant, they're working on the closed loop, this kind of platform side. I think as SME and data analytics also for some algorithm, for some like AI method, this kind of deployment, I think there's a lot of opportunities. I think last week, and federal government just announced that I think sponsor Alberta, Toronto, Montreal $125 million for AI initiative, and field is for automated vehicle. So I think this is a very good opportunity to see how because in Canada, Montreal and University of Alberta, that's the top university for the artificial intelligence. I think this kind of AI technology potentially can play a very important role and also have a lot of opportunities for commercialization.
Thank you, Tony. Looks like we have just around 5 minutes remaining. Thank you to all the webinar attendees who have submitted questions. There are still quite a few questions that we haven't had a chance to respond to, so we will distribute those questions to the panel members, and we will attempt to distribute some responses to the larger group if it's possible. Before we wrap up, I'd like to ask one final question to all panel members, bringing the conversation back to the three themes of policy, privacy, and technology. We've touched on this quite a bit, but just to get some final comments. Moving forward, in your opinion, what do you feel is the greatest challenge to overcome for the mass adoption of CVAV technology? Is the challenge related to policy, privacy, technology, or something else? And what can transportation agencies and the industry be doing to help overcome this challenge? Let's start with Barrie.
Okay. I think the biggest challenge for government, and not just the federal government, but government at all levels, is getting their arms around all of the implications. I spoke a while back to one of the municipalities in the Toronto area, and they said very bluntly that their challenge was getting their arms around all the different issues. The AVs and CVs are going to change virtually, or have an impact on virtually every department in every level of government. And it's moving very, very quickly. It's very disruptive. And the way in which we organize governments is not conducive to adapting our cities, our governments, our lives, to adapting everything in the face of such a fast-moving and such a disruptive technology.
Thank you, Barrie. Philippa, do you have anything to add? What's your opinion?
Yeah, consumer trust is essential here, and it's not going to happen if there are publicized disasters, or if people feel that their data is not being properly protected. So that issue needs to be addressed really urgently. I guess I don't need to repeat myself from what I've said. I think government and industry can play a role here. I think Canada is very well positioned internationally to take a leadership role. We are respected for our privacy legislation and approach, and I think that's an area where we could actually be global leaders, and CVAVs is on the privacy side.
Thank you, Philippa. Tony, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we missed the one component is in the future, connected vehicle, automated vehicle. So what's the operation model? I think that's maybe one bigger component somehow we need to think more about. And just similar to the cell phone, similar to the computer, change our life. So kind of vehicle and automated vehicle definitely will change our life. And like a Uber and how they change our, change our style. And also now, maybe most of you guys heard, and the sharing bike, and in Asia countries, there's a huge change now. So I think this is kind of transportation, IoT in transportation will generate some new operation model and business model.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks again for the panel members for taking the time to join us today on behalf of the ATIS, ATMS, and CVAV technical committees. We very much appreciate your time, and thank you to the webinar attendees for providing some questions that's resulted in some very interesting dialogue. I'm sure that over the next few months and a year, there will be many more webinars focused on this topic to come, as it's a rapidly developing technology and will impact everyone within ITS. Before we close out, I'd like to pass it over quickly to Yannicka from ITS Canada to provide a quick few comments on the ITS World Congress coming up in Montreal. Are you on the line, Yannicka?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon to all. First of all, I would like to thank Jonathan for having done such an excellent job this afternoon to be the moderator of the webinar. So thank you, Jonathan. Could not have done this without you. Thank you to all who are on the online. Yeah, as you know, ITS Canada is co-hosting the ITS World Congress 2017. It takes place October 29th to November 2nd. The call for papers and call for special intercession has been closed, and we should see in about a month and a half a draft program online on what the ITS World Congress looks like from a technical presentation perspective. Exhibit sales are going very, very well. There's only a few spaces left up for a grab. The registration and housing portal is open, and please note that the early bird registration deadline for delegates is April 28th. Speakers, though, have until June 1st to register online. Please note that ITS Canada members in good standing receive a registration discount. There is a Smart Cities Pavilion that is currently being worked on, and all this information is also available on the ITS World Congress website, which is itsworldcongress2017.org. I think that is my update. Thank you.
Thanks, Janneke, and thanks again, everyone, for joining, the panel members and attendees. I believe a recording of this webinar will be posted on the ITS Canada website at some point. Thanks again, and have a good day.